Hi, welcome to my latest YouTube video. I'm Rosenberg. Today I get to talk to Rick Belden, a friend, a colleague, and probably one of the best life coaches I've ever met. If you followed me, you know that we've talked about two or three times before. He wrote a foreword to one of my books, and he's just a wonderful person who has a deep understanding of all sorts of mental health concepts that usually elude a lot of coaches. But welcome back, Rick. It's so nice to see you again.
Hi, Ross. Thanks for the opportunity to visit again. And, thanks to everybody who's listening. Look forward to a helpful discussion about some various things that we're both interested in.
Yeah, we always seem to like talk about stuff that just kind of really connects and we get good conversation. In fact, 6 years ago, we did a video on the mother wound and it was viewed 400,000 times. Can you believe that? We must have said something right, huh?
Yeah, apparently so.
So Rick and I were talking before the podcast and we were thinking, well, what should we talk about again? And we thought, why don't we revisit the topic of the mother wound, which was the topic of the video I just referred to. Rick's vision about what it is and how he helps his clients through it is just fascinating. I just love to hear it. So Rick, can you start us off by explaining what is a mother wound from your point of view? How do you see it?
Yes, absolutely. And I always insist on doing that in these conversations because there are a lot of people throwing that term around right now, and they all have their own definitions. And so the one I'm going to share right now is the one that I've been using for several years now. A mother wound is the result of a significant disconnection or disruption in the relationship between mother and son. It could be mother and daughter, but I work with men. So language is male focused for me. This can occur not only due to under-engagement by the mother with her son, but also over-engagement. The fundamental problem is that the son has significant needs that are not being seen and met by his mother over a long period of time. This can happen whenever a mother prioritizes her own needs over the needs of her son. The most harmful scenario is when she uses her son as a resource to meet her own needs. And
Right.
again, it could be a daughter, but I work primarily with men, so I use that language.
It's interesting. Just like when we talked about it the last time, I see it as you do, but I juxtapose it to my human magnet syndrome theory. And that basically states that if you're a codependent or have self-love deficit disorder, it's highly likely, I say in the high 95%, that you're going to fall in love with someone who is the opposite but matched, and that would be a narcissist, or to be specific, a pathological narcissist, someone with narcissistic, borderline, or antisocial personality disorder. And codependency is not connected to gender, even though there's probably more female codependents than males. But I even challenge that. I mean, who really knows what the truth is on that? But I see codependency as going both ways in the gender spectrum. And so the mother wound, as you talk about it, sounds like a mother who has narcissistic traits or narcissistic personality traits, or who is codependent or has self-love deficit disorder, an SLD, who is so fused and focused on taking care of the narcissist partner, the husband, um, the paramour, whatever you want to call that relationship, loses sight of her children. Or in the case of what you talk about, where there's enmeshment or emotional incest, compensates with the child to make up for what she's not getting with her husband. I'd love to start it off by talking about exactly how you see it and what is the typical person like who calls you or emails you or texts you, however you get new clients, and walk me through how it looks and how you start to kind of figure things out to help them see things.
Sure. Although I will say, I mean, there are some substantive differences in the way what I call a mother wound affects a man versus how a woman is affected in terms of how that plays out in their life as an adult. A lot of
Yes.
men, as you said, who come to me, and I have some tools that I use to help these men assess whether they have an active mother wound that is replaying and showing up over and over again in their lives and in their relationships. And it can affect a man in all areas of his life, in his work, and particularly in his relationship with himself. A lot of men that show up, and just about every man that shows up, we have some other work to do, And it's often, typically the case that their relationship with themselves is poor. They haven't
Right.
learned how to prioritize themselves. They don't know what their needs are. They tend to, whether it's in a relationship or in work or in other areas of life, they tend to be self-sacrificing, whether they really know it or not. And one of the biggest things with these mother wounded men is that because they don't know how to prioritize themselves, and because they're still living in that wound and trying to sort it out
Right.
unconsciously, they will go into rescue mode,
Right.
which is what I did over and over again, which is nothing against the women I was involved with at all, but I was attracted to women who needed help uh,
Right.
because I felt like that was my role growing up. My mother needs help. I need to
Right.
rescue her. I need to save her. And so I just continued to do that unconsciously, throughout the majority of my adult life. And the guys that I work with, they may have never had a girlfriend, or they may have been married for 30 years, or they may have been divorced a couple of times, but they still have a lot of those dynamics I just talked about that are going on in themselves. And to some extent, they might recognize it. They may only recognize it to the point where the reason they've reached out to me is because they've failed so much that they just
Right.
can't face it anymore.
So this mother wound, the way I see it, and it's a little bit multidimensional, but we already know that our points of views are similar but different. But what is similar is what you describe is what I know of, or what is classically known as codependent, or someone who's has self-love deficit disorder. They tend to take care of other people. They tend to be self-sacrificial. They do better when they're in the background. They're not good at expressing what they need. They're easily manipulated. Just to simplify it, I refer to that as the SLD, the codependent. That the trauma in childhood that creates SLDD, codependency, is attachment trauma because the parents, and typically one parent has a narcissistic personality disorder and the other is the codependent. Remember the human magnet syndrome. Because of the parents' commingling of mental health problems, the child gets lost. One child, usually, sometimes two, finds his or her way to the parents, to the narcissist parent, and sometimes the codependent parent, as the good child, the hero child, the gifted child. And that child learns to mold themselves to this parent's needs and forget about or push away their own needs so that they can find a place in their family and not be neglected or harmed.
Mhm.
And that in totality is the attachment trauma that is responsible for SLDD. And so the mother wound it could come from a narcissist parent, as it
Mhm.
seems, or a codependent parent, but just it's the inability for the child to feel like he or she matters and that they can just be themselves and figure out life without having to keep an eye to, what's going on with the other parent and make sure everything is functioning.
The core problem that we're both talking about, I believe, is one of availability, right? So if the parent, we'll say the mother in this case, is highly narcissistic, she's not available to the child.
Right,
If she's highly codependent, she's also not available to the child
right,
because her attention is going somewhere else. And I think that has a lot to do with how a child gets lost, is basically that feeling that nobody is there for me. And it's
right,
not just that feeling, it's the fact that they're affected developmentally. Because as you know,
right,
there are stages during childhood through teenage and
right.
even adulthood where there's supposed to be an adult there to basically walk you across the threshold and help you up when you fall down and point you in the right direction. And if you have a parent or two parents who are just unavailable most of the time, you're going to wind up trying to figure that stuff out on your own. And then
Yep.
you're going to wind up with developmental disruptions that show up in adulthood.
It's interesting, Rick, because first of all, we see it very similarly in this cauldron of potential opportunities where parents unconditionally love their children, and the children get to go, freely and sometimes effortlessly through these developmental sequences or phases. They get to discover who they are, and they get to figure out through trial and error, mistake, love, tenderness, sometimes, structure, discipline. Like they develop a self-concept that they are lovable just because of who they are. and they don't have to sacrifice themselves, their reality, in order to feel safe. But the adults we work with, the ones who are subject to this mother wound, is they had to somehow figure out a way to make themselves valuable, desirable,
Yes.
likable, important, so that they can get the attention of either the narcissist parent, which is much harder because of their narrow focus and their egotism and selfishness and narcissistic rage and injuries and all this stuff. They have to mold themselves at a time when a child is supposed to let the environment flow through them and past them and figure out who they are. They have to make big decisions. What do I have to do in order to get mommy or daddy to like me, to love me, to give me attention? And it disrupts child development. It is the attachment trauma. Attachment theory talks about this. And that is the beginning of needing to take care of everyone as an adult and forgetting about yourself. Because at the very beginning of your life, you learned, well, that's how love works.
Yes.
And it's awfully hard to change that type of focus, that type of framing of how relationships are in adulthood, which is why what you do is so darn important. I would imagine the men that you work with are pretty hurt and desperate by the time they get to you. If you feel stuck in painful relationship patterns, you're not alone. I've already helped thousands of people break free from what I call self-love deficit disorder. Choose self-love over the insanity of narcissistic abuse. Work with me. My psychotherapy can help.
And in that context, I'll just say, and partially in response to what you said, is that one of the things we don't, and I say we because it happened to me,
Yeah.
we don't get to learn in those kind of heartbreaking situations as a child is we don't get to learn how to fail successfully, right?
Good point.
Every failure is potentially like a survival situation. And it doesn't even have to be a big one. It might
Right.
just be you have the wrong look on your face
Right.
at the wrong moment. Um, and so, yeah, so all of these things have led the men that come to see me in various degrees to feel like they want to make some kind of a change. They know they need to, but they don't really know what it is. You know, they can tell me what's going wrong. They can tell me about the things that where they failed in their lives, or, for some of the younger men, I mean, it's hard for them to even get started.
Right.
Uh, it's hard for them to even get started in life. Um, and so there's frustration, there's confusion, and there is a sense of, in a lot of cases, not really being completely sure who they are.
Mm-hmm.
They've learned to perform in a set of roles, uh, but when they're alone, or like maybe some guy retires, and the first 3 months is awesome, and then after that, he's like, I don't know why I'm here.
Right.
Um, so
It,
yeah, there's
it
one of
just
the things that I really focus on with everybody is, let's look at your relationship with yourself, because that is
it
the number one priority. That is if you can develop and progress that and understand it better, that will unblock you in all kinds of ways.
it reminds me of an analogy that I made up, and who knows, probably got it from someone else. A person from the Inuit tribe, inappropriately known as Eskimos, where they travel to Miami and they try to prepare for it, but there's no language. There's no way to describe sun and beaches and sunburn because there's no conception of it because it's so far from their life experience. And no matter how much you try to prepare someone, and let's say in this analogy, the Inuit person who's excited to go somewhere where they're not frozen all the time, and they think warm is 40 degrees Fahrenheit. For those who are European, I have no idea what that means Celsius, but it's 10 degrees above freezing. And so in this story, they come to Florida and they get very frustrated and uncomfortable. and and they're sweating and they're just nothing feels right and everything is foreign and they want to go back to the freezing tundra way up in the northern territories of Canada where they were too cold and felt like they would can never be happy. So using that as the analogy as an SLD, a codependent who wants to get better, but they just can't imagine what it's like to set boundaries and have someone listen to them, to not feel invisible, to believe that stating your opinion matters and makes people respect you more and invites friends, invites respect. Analogously to the Inuit, they don't know what the beach and 90 degrees in Miami or 100 degrees is like. They can't. And so if they don't can't prepare for it, there's going to be a need to go back to the way it was. And that is what I think we both do is we help our clients understand what this phenomena is and mother wounding, attachment trauma, codependency, whatever terminology we use to help them like see what it is. Like, oh yeah, because of what happened to me as a child and my relationship with my mom, I didn't learn all this stuff. And I think that experience and that naming of it and that explaining of it helps resolve the trauma. What do you think of this process and can you relate to it in your own practice?
Yes, I can relate to it professionally and I can relate to it personally. When I offer people a free 30-minute discovery session to kind of check me out and see if we're a good match. And one of the things I always talk about in that discovery session is like, I'm gonna help you do some reconceptualization because your internal model, your internal narrative of how everything works is not helping you. It's not productive. It's not accurate. So yes, you have to learn some definitional vocabulary, but you also have to learn some new concepts. And one of the ways that showed up for me, kind of your example about what is sand, what is the sun, and all that stuff. When I first got into my first men's group back in the late 1980s, um, uh, both facilitators talked a lot about the importance of grief and grieving.
Yeah,
And I knew the dictionary definition of those words, but I
right.
had no personal understanding of what that,
Exactly.
none
Yeah,
at all. And over many, many years, I began to develop some personal experience with it, with some help, as you said, with some guidance, with some assistance in framing. Like when you feel this way, this is probably what it means. This is the benefit of feeling this way and sitting with it and letting it happen. Um, and the thing I learned when I was doing my mother wound work, when I really got into the depths of it back about 10 years ago, is that there was a lot of grief there
right,
about, as the thing I mentioned to you earlier, I had to come to terms with the fact that I was never going to get that mother I wanted.
right,
Never, ever. And that just I felt devastated when I was actually able to stop backing away from that and working around it and actually let myself have that knowledge and have it's such a profound thing because we're really talking about a child, a
right,
bunch of younger selves inside that work their
right,
asses off the whole time in the hope that at some point she's going to be the kind of mother that I want and need. And
right,
children get very devoted to fantasies that are important for their needs and their survival. And so I had done a lot of grieving work before that, but that's when I got really deep into it. And
right,
uh, and that's not something that people necessarily aspire to do. And
right.
I
Yeah,
don't blame
yeah,
them.
yeah,
I still hate it myself. But I've learned, and it's not just about being sad, and it's not just about crying, and it's not just about being in pain. It's about actually acknowledging the truth of a situation, something that you've already lost or never had, and you're never going to get or never
right,
going to get back, and get to the point where all that emotional energy that's attached to that and wrapped around it can move up and out, and you can be free.
right. Yes. And going with the idea of naming something that the person had no conception of or understanding of, is to talk about what you missed and give examples of normality. I do this a lot. I like to tell stories. It's kind of part of my psychotherapy technique. I'll tell a story, and sometimes they're personal stories, sometimes they're amalgamations of other client stories, which of course I keep all the identifying information confidential. But these stories are important to give people an idea of what is normal. What does a person do when someone is demanding and bossy and narcissistic?
Mhm.
How do healthy people, people who are self-love abundant, how do they react? How do they set boundaries? And so it's important to help them understand that they should be upset. They should be angry at the person who is hurting them, who's being narcissistic, not at themselves. And
Mhm.
it's this new idea, it's a new concept. And through that discussion and the introduction of new ideas based upon a different way of thinking, they start to get connected to feelings of loss. They have been taking care of people who have expressly and indirectly ignored their needs and lost years, decades of their life. And the sadness, the loneliness, the shame, we help them identify with that, put words to it so that they can understand it. And as you said, it was wonderful how you said it, work through it and get to the other side.
Mhm.
And so you can't just say, hey, we need to lead you towards grief so you can let it go and integrate this newer, healthier perspective. We got to help them see what it is. Like I'm going back to the Inuit person, help them understand that, yeah, they want to get out of the freezing, the sub-zero, but going to Miami is not what you want to do. That's a whole nother world that you actually need maybe to move 500 miles south away from some northern peninsula near the Arctic Ocean, Arctic near Santa Claus. And through the introduction of experiences and losses, the grief gives them words to talk about what they didn't know. How do you work with a man's grief once he understands what he lost or what he should have gotten that he didn't?
Well, what you just described is, an adult attempting to complete a developmental process that didn't happen as a child. It has to be approached with patience, because so
Right,
much of this work is iterative and it builds upon itself. So I have to find out where that man is,
right,
in his relationship with grief. Does he have a relationship with his own grief? Does he understand what it is? Is he aware of his losses? Uh,
right.
when he feels a loss or a failure, how does he respond emotionally by default? Does he respond with anger? Does he respond with frustration? Does he just check out? Does he try to avoid it in every way possible? And so for a lot of these men, the grief project, if you want to put it that way,
Right.
begins with initially just starting to be able to understand what they're feeling moment to
Mhm.
moment and connect that with the body. Like, so, when you were talking earlier about a child not getting the attention that was needed as an adult to
Mhm.
feel safe and develop properly, I felt that in my chest. It was like, oh God,
Right.
that sounds heartbreaking. It's like, well, I didn't used to be like that, so a lot of the work that I do with men is like to help them to begin to develop that sort of conscious awareness of what they're feeling in their body, in reaction or response to different situations, and also just doing different exercises with them, doing creative exercises, drawing pictures, doing some writing. Um,
Right.
it's incredibly important to get those men in touch with their younger selves. I typically find with most men, there's a 6 to 7 year old in there who's
Mm.
got some unfinished business. And there's usually, just for starters, there's usually two. There's that guy, and there's a pre-adolescent, early adolescent. So like somewhere between 12 and 15. There's
Interesting.
usually that guy's in there too. And so I do some exercises with them to prioritize. Let's let's see if we can get connected with these guys, find out what do they think of you, uh, what would they like you to know, because they've got a whole lot of information that can help you understand yourself and help you understand your life and help you begin to develop some different
Mm.
patterns and ways to approach things. And so that's a key part of it, with everybody, regardless of what the presenting sort of problem is.
That's interesting. Thank you for sharing how you work with these clients. But you said something that I connected to. Well, the whole thing I appreciate it, but it was the body's role in this. And one of the best book titles in the history of mankind is Bessel van der Kolk's book, "The Body Keeps the Score."
Mhm.
And I knew this by accident 25 years ago when I started to develop what would become my Healing the Inner Trauma Child trauma integration method. I knew that the somatic experience of a problem gets people, the somatic, the body's experience of a problem gets people to the emotional experience of it that is difficult to express, or in the case of trauma, has been disassociated. It has actually been moved from our conscious memory systems to our limbic systems, specifically the amygdala, and stored there where the mind, the brain still keeps tabs on you and makes sure or tries to make sure you don't experience or get close to the same trauma, but it doesn't allow you to remember it. And I do in the process of my self-love recovery treatment program, when we get to the trauma work, is we get to it by first the body.
Mhm.
And without going into it in detail, but it looks like this. We're talking about sadness, we're talking about grief, and we're talking about losses, specifically when they were a child. And they go by what I call data memory. There's two types of memories. The data memory is what we recall, the information. The
Mhm.
affective memory is the memory that is sequestered and put away and disassociated, typical for SLDs or people with PTSD. And we talk about the memory, and I could see in their face there's an experience of pain. I can see it, that whether it's, tears in the eyes, whether it's shaking, there's just this shift where I can tell the affective memory is just kind of is being triggered, but it's something's happening with the body. And it's through the experience with the body, I connect them back to that memory. But I don't want to go into that technique into detail here, but to say using a client's experience with body sensations are so important to help them dealing with this trauma, this grief, and this losses. And it's so nice to hear you do that also.
Yeah, and it's, because I'm a coach, I want to like teach people how to do these things for themselves.
Right.
Uh, I don't want them to have to rely on me to have those experiences. But as I said, when I was younger, I needed experienced people around me to help me frame these things. Uh, so that, one example I've used with clients before is you've probably seen those old maps before the world had been circumnavigated, and it
Yeah.
shows you go to the edge and then there's a bunch of dragons and then you fall off the edge. That's what this stuff feels like
Yeah.
to people, right?
Yeah.
And so they don't, and that's the thing, they don't have a map. So we talked
Yeah.
earlier about concepts. Part of a concept is having a map. Uh, and part of challenging the map you have is having somebody accompany you up to the edge and
Hmm.
help you understand that that's just a story that somebody told you. You're
Yeah.
not actually going to fall off the edge of the earth. I feel like
Yeah.
I'm going to fall off the edge of the earth every time I go into grieving.
You're right. It's like a visual representation of ourselves. An emotional understanding of ourselves requires us to have like a picture of it,
Yes.
and understanding, kind of like what they say in mental health circles, a cognitive schema, a way that we think about it using words, memories, and thoughts. And if we don't have the experience. It goes back to what we talked earlier. We don't have, and I quote this for podcast listeners, a map to guide us. It's not just showing them a way, aka metaphorically giving them a map. Sometimes it also requires updating or actually removing or updating an old map, and say a map that base says you go past a certain part in the Atlantic, you're going to fall off into the abyss, is to help them understand that this map never guided them to self-love or to toward healing, and that they have to suspend it, get rid of it, or analogously throw it away and consider this new way of looking at things. In fact, that gives me a lot of ideas for what I want to do with some clients. So thank you, Rick. I like the idea of conceptualize it as a map. And I would bet your clients resonate very strongly with that.
People, as you know, people model and process things in different ways. I'm an image processor, right? Like I
That's funny.
translate all information into some sort of image, some sort of model,
Yeah.
something that would be it's internal, but it would be visual. Uh,
Yeah.
I'm always been a model builder. It's like, every
Right.
time I started a new job, it seemed like the first few weeks I wasn't doing anything. It's because I was modeling the organization, I was modeling the project, I was modeling all this stuff. And then once I get my model or my map in place, then I can go forward. And what I want to do and what I hope I'm doing with clients is helping them learn how to build their own map and how
Right.
to test the edges of it on a regular
Interesting.
basis and see,
Hmm.
is that really a boundary? Is that really a cliff's edge? Or is that
Hmm.
just a belief or some conditioning that was laid into me that tells me don't go there because something bad will happen?
I think it was yesterday, could have been the day before. I had a client. She was struggling with her boyfriend who was reacting really strongly to her boundaries and being pouty and angry and not talking to her for a day or two. And then later apologizing. And so it's this big cycle of my client getting upset at the way her partner reacted to her boundaries, and then saying something and then getting punished and then, making up and so forth. And so I told a story. This is about a relationship with a friend that I have now. And it's a story about her getting upset at me. And I told two versions of the story, me getting upset with her and her getting upset with me. And each story was us, of course, separate situations, saying to the other, this upsets me. I don't like this. And then I made it accurate because these discussions aren't easy. And so I portrayed it as a challenging subject. And then I walked them through how it manifests into a closer connection, more information about the other person and learning. And in both of these stories, they ended with either apologized, depending on exactly what happened. Each person learned a lot about each other and their friendship got closer. It was a productive process. And it was interesting because in both of these stories, my client, she was just glued to my description of the story because she hadn't ever experienced two people having a disagreement, one person setting a boundary, and then the conversation that came from that actually worked things out and made things better. And so in that story, I felt like I was responsible to come up with something that was believable,
Mhm.
that could illustrate a problem that they've never seen work through. And so in a sense, I was showing them kind of a map or a vivid explanation or an example of something that up until that point they couldn't really conceive, and because of that, see.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to kind of bring us back to where we started,
Yeah,
uh, a man with a mother wound is he's running with a corrupted map.
yeah.
It's highly constrained. There's a lot of inaccurate information in it. A lot of the
Hmm.
inaccurate information in that man's map came from him as a child, because with his child's brain and his limited experience and his limited knowledge of the world, he came to a bunch of conclusions about reality based on the way that he was being treated, his needs not being met, not feeling safe, all those things we talked about. And he was drawing, the children are just drawing their life map all the time. And they wind up with these wildly inaccurate maps that are too small.
I don't know why. I thought back in the olden days when they had their first GPSs, and I think I had one was called TomTom. They were just actual physical items that were separate from a phone. You always had to update the map because at that time, the map making industry had started to depend heavily on satellite imagery, and the maps were always being updated. And every time the map was updated, it would actually come up with a better way to get me to one place to another. So I like this idea of helping people update maps, throw away them, get new ones. We actually got to where we started from, the mother moon. And of course, this is always so enjoyable. In fact, fun for me to have these conversations with you. And I hope the listeners and the viewers can enjoy and learn as much as I do. So thank you so much for being a part of this, Rick.
You're welcome, Ross. I always enjoyed doing this. And as always, we went off the map. Uh,
Yeah, we did. We didn't really stick to our initial discussion of what we were going to talk about. So there we go.
I didn't know we were going to go that way. And it's great.
Yeah, I'm glad we did it that way. Well, is there anything you'd like to tell my listeners or viewers about yourself and how to get in contact with you?
My legacy website is rickbelden.com. If you're interested in coaching, that website is rickbeldencoaching.com. And as I said earlier, I do offer a free 30-minute discovery session to find out if I'm a good match for you or a good match for me. And you can find me here on YouTube under Rick Belden.
You know, you kind of impacted me. I now offer a 10-minute discovery session. Sometimes it's 15 minutes, of course, free session, so someone can understand the potential value of working with me as their psychotherapist. So thank you for that. And of course, it gives me a chance to say that. I also like people to know that I have a Patreon program, a subscription program that gives people access to information that's not available to anyone else. Advanced viewing of some of my videos and ideas and articles and everything and stuff like that. Also, if people would like to know more information about what I do, please go to selfloverecovery.com or email me at help@selfloverecovery.com. Thank you, Rick. This has been great. And I look forward to the next one because they're always a lot of fun.
See you next time.
Okay, bye-bye. If you feel stuck in painful relationship patterns, you're not alone. I've already helped thousands of people break free from what I call self-love deficit disorder. Choose self-love over the insanity of narcissistic abuse. Work with me. My psychotherapy can help.